I'm Melinda Gillispie. I'm the Executive Director for Diversity and Inclusion for Prisma Health, and I am delighted to be your moderator today. Listen, let's shake it up a little bit. Y'all are looking at me like y'all ready to eat me. Lunch is not until we got 1 hour in this session, and then y'all gonna have lunch, okay? All right, so thank you. So let's first give yourselves a round of applause for this wonderful summit. It's been absolutely fantastic so far, and I do believe, Natasha Bowman, that this is the largest breakout session of the DEI Summit so far. And thinking about this is our first session, so so we are delighted. Listen, we have a workplace mental health warrior with us today, and it is my pleasure to introduce your speaker. This session is called Breaking Down Barriers, Building Resistance, Redefining Workplace Mental Health and DEI Principles. Let me share a little bit about this session. We're going to go into the intersection of mental health and DEI. We have a speaker who is not afraid to talk about the intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health. She's going to be offering insights and strategies for organizations seeking to foster a culture of well-being and belonging. Let me tell you a little bit about Natasha Bowman. She is the president of the Natasha Bowman Consulting Group. A little bit about her. She is the graduate of the University of Arkansas School of Law, so we got an attorney in the house, y'all. She is a LinkedIn learning instructor. She is she's on the advisory council for the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council. Now, anytime we hear Harvard Review, right? Harvard Business, all right, we know we got something special here today. She is a board member of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, that's NAMI. She is from New York City, y'all. And she's here with us here in the South to help us to break down barriers and build resilience. Please welcome Natasha Bowman, the president of Natasha Bowman Consulting Group and a mental health workplace warrior. Let's give her a big round of applause.
I probably don't need a mic because I have a big mouth. And you're probably thinking, you don't sound like you're from New York City. I sound like y'all, right? Because I'm originally from LA. Or Alabama. Roll Tide, you know. And I did go to the University of Arkansas. I'm glad to have one of my former peers there. I haven't seen her 16 years since I graduated, since you graduated before me. So thank you so much for having me here in Greenville, South Carolina. So glad to be back in the South. Ate at Waffle House this morning. I did not be happy. I did not be happy here. Don't let me get a Cracker Barrel. I'm really good to go. So thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about myself, specifically how I ended up becoming this mental health warrior, which was not a title that I had about 3 years ago. So here is my quick journey before we get into the strategies of cultivating mental wellness in the workplace and the intersectionality of DEI and mental health. So without further ado, this is me at 11 years old. Well, it's not me, it's a girl that's on the internet. Much cuter than me at 11 years old, but there's not a lot of pictures of me at 11 because I was born with congenital heart disease. And over the course of the next 11 years, I had several hospitalized cases of pneumonia. And when I turned 11, things got really, really worse. My health deteriorated. And so my pediatric cardiologist couldn't determine the correlation between pneumonia and heart disease. But decided to go ahead and see me. And when they put the monitor, or whatever you call it, on my chest, the cardiologist says, "Oh my goodness, you have 6 months to live." So, at 11 years old, I underwent open heart surgery. And as you can imagine, that's the age you remember everything, you know, and I remember that moment. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm standing here. I'm still, it's not a sad story. I'm still here, many decades later. But, you know, you can be going through all of that. That would be the worst that life would have to offer me. I'm like, oh, I've been through the worst. I've been told I have 6 months to live. But I did decide in that moment, right, life is short. So I'm going to live each day till its fullest. I'm going to grow to my full potential. And that's exactly what I did over the course of the next decades. I won't say how many, but decades. So by the time February of 2020 came, I had written my first book. You can't do that at work. If you're in HR, you know. You know, we always say, we're going to write a book about these things one day. I wrote a book about it. I had done my first TED Talk, and I had been named the top global 30 Blue Guru for management and leadership, and was headed to Indonesia to get that award. Life could not have been any better. Like, what could go wrong? March of 2020. The very next month, right, my life came crashing down. As we know, the COVID pandemic came. All of my speaking engagements were canceled. That trip to Indonesia, canceled. All of my clients' projects canceled. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have anything to do. And while many of you may have enjoyed that time of quarantine, maybe you were making TikToks or jamming and DJing nice in Club Quarantine, doing nothing was not for me, just sitting home and being a mom and a wife. That was not what I'd usually done and didn't quite know how to do that. And so my brain went to places that it had never gone before. And I was in search of identity. Because being a black woman from the South and being successful, if you will, from a professional standpoint, my whole identity had been tied into my professional success. And so without that, I didn't know who I was. And I went searching for that. And I actually found myself in dangerous places, searching for that identity and doing strange things. I gave $30,000 to a stranger on the internet. That sounds strange. Somebody really gasped. On the internet, that's where my brain was. And this went on for a couple of months, even after the murder of George Floyd, when workplaces went through a racial reckoning, my phone started to ring again, I found myself in front of Zooms, and I had more clients than ever at that point. However, I still was in this place. And then just one day, in the middle of summer, the light bulb came on, and I kind of returned to my usual self out of nowhere. But I kept wondering, what was that? Like, I gave away money, I was doing these things, and I found myself in this place of guilt and shame and blame. Like, what happened? And I found myself going to a dark place, a place I had never gone before. And it got so dark that in January of 2021, on a cold night in New York, I decided I no longer wanted to be on this earth anymore. And I decided that I wanted to take my own life. That night, I attempted to do so. And the next thing I remember was waking up through hazy vision and seeing strangers taking the strings out of my pajama pants, taking the shoelaces out of my shoes, and I'm like, how did I get sneakers on? Where am I? I had been involuntarily admitted into a mental health facility. And then they marched me to a small room and placed me on a mattress on a floor where a person watched me for the next few days. I was on suicide watch. And it was while I was admitted that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that explained a lot. It explained how I could go for days without sleep. I thought people were lazy if you were sleeping. Like, why are you sleeping so much? Like, it explained my drive, my creativity, all of these things. But it also explained those dark days that I experienced as well. So as you can imagine, being, over 40, being diagnosed with a serious medical condition, you're supposed to gasp, not because I had a serious medical condition, but because I'm over 40. I mean, that was the big, moment. All big. But, you can imagine how I felt invited to speak on these things. And I won't be name talk anything at this point, right? And I went to this dark place and I shared that with my mental health provider, who said, Natasha, you probably have had this diagnosis for over 20 years. That's what's driven your professional success. The only thing you have now is a diagnosis. So that just means everything you did before the diagnosis, you can do after. In fact, you're going to do it better because you're going to have treatment, right? So with that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to destigmatize myself. I'm going to stop looking at all those negative images and narratives that we hear about mental health and look for people who are thriving. And when I did that research, I was overwhelmed by what I found, right? I found people all the way from Mark Twain to Mariah Carey had been diagnosed with a mental health condition. In fact, I don't know if I put it here or not, yes. So I'm originally from Montgomery, Alabama, the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement. And my grandmother lived just a few doors down from where Dr. Martin Luther King lived with his family. And in my research, I found out that Martin Luther King was a 2-time suicide survivor. Raise your hand if you knew that. Just a couple of people. I didn't know that. But does that change your perception of Dr. Martin Luther King? Or you're like, oh, I'm not going to respect him anymore, right? Only thing we can think of is was his conviction to bring equality to Black Americans across the U.S. So with that, armed with all this knowledge that I now have, knowing that there are people, in fact, 1 in 5 people who have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, and many of those people are still thriving and doing things to change this world in a positive way, I said, well, you know what? So will I. In fact, I'm going to turn my pain into purpose. My cape was supposed to go, but I always wear cape now. Because I'm like, I'm going to be that mental health warrior. It was so important to me. Because as I did that research, I didn't see a lot of people that looked like me as a Black woman sharing their mental health struggles. And it was important, once I realized I can get through this treatment is working. I can still go back to thriving and all of these accomplishments, that I be the face of someone with a mental health condition. So, with that, after discussing with my family, I said, I want to make my story public. So one morning I woke up, I posted my professional profile pic on LinkedIn, which is my favorite platform, and I had about 80,000 followers then, and said, this is the face of bipolar disorder. Now, I'll admit, I was scared. I didn't know what the response was going to be. I get trolled on LinkedIn all the time. And, but to my surprise, I got an overwhelmingly positive response. In fact, many people were saying, me too. I struggle with my mental health, or my spouse does, or my child does, or my parent does. It was like another Me Too movement. But there was another thing that I heard, and that was, I wish I could share my story too, but I'm afraid of what? The stigma, especially where? In the workplace. And that really resonated with me, because my work is work. Everything I do is about work, right? So that resonated with me, and I thought about, if I was in the workplace, I was working for someone else like I had most of my career, would I have been as vocal as I am right now about my mental health struggles? Probably not, right? And so that's when I knew what my new mission was, and that was to remove the stigma of mental health. So now, armed with all of this support, that post went viral. In fact, LinkedIn did a whole commercial about that post, Conversations for Change. And I was so excited. Yes, I'm doing it. Got my cape on, you know. I was like flying around New York City, like Spider-Man, you know. I'm doing it. But I didn't realize the continued stigma that I would continue to face. In addition to the self-stigma, there's societal stigma, structural stigma, public stigma, label avoidance. Not too many people are okay with saying, I have this bipolar disorder, right? Because they feel they're going to be labeled. How many people have walked into your office and said that? Or I'm schizophrenic, right? But they're there. right? So that label avoidance. So the stigma, although I'm on this journey, continued to follow me. One of the things that showed up was I'm a global traveler, have been for years, but for some reason I never got a TSA pass. So LaGuardia, one of the main airports in New York that I fly in and out of, decided to do construction. And one day it took me forever to get through there. And I'm like, okay, I gotta get a TSA pass. Okay, so I go to my computer, I sit down. You know, remember, a TSA pass is to do what? Number one, check your identity. You say who you say you are. Two, to make sure you're not a threat to the United States of America. I should have no problem with that. All right? I know who I am. I am who I say I am. I'm not a threat. So I'm going through the questions. Are you a U.S. citizen? Yes, I am. Born and raised in Montgomery, Alabama. Have you been convicted of a felony? Nope. You know, all of these things till I get to the final question. Have you been involuntarily admitted to an inpatient facility for mental health or psychiatric reasons? What was my answer? Yes. Go back up to the top. If your answer is yes to questions 2, 3, 4, or 6, you may want to reconsider applying. Application denied. I am a threat to the United States because I got treatment for my mental health. From now on, I will need to take my shoes off at the airport because I'm a threat. But that's not the worst thing, right? Taking my shoes off. I've been doing it all these years. I didn't realize the stigma that I would receive from family members. In a Black household, you don't talk about mental health publicly. I was the golden child, the one with all of these accomplishments. My child has bipolar disorder. It's not something you brag on. And because of my being vocal, there are family members very close in my immediate family that haven't spoken to me in years. I also didn't realize the importance of having a mental health professional who's culturally competent. You see, if you don't get treatment until after a crisis, you get assigned someone, right? So I was assigned someone, I was working with them, and my husband was my main supporter, was working with them, and everything was going good. And until my family abandoned me, and I was very sad, and I started to ideate suicide again. So my husband picked up the phone and called my mental health professional and said he was concerned. So she goes, take her to the hospital. So he goes, okay, all right, that's all I need to hear. So as we're packing up going to the hospital, my phone rings. And it's my mental health professional. She goes, are you alone? And I'm like, yes. She goes, I just want to let you know that I called CPS to come and pick up your daughter. And I also called the police to come pick you up. Right. I said, well, my husband said he's gonna get me and my daughter, you know, to safety. She's like 12, and he's a caregiver, been a caregiver of my daughter pretty much all her life, and she didn't trust that my Black husband. She had never seen a caregiver that was a Black man, of a Black father, and didn't trust that. So my husband and I run to the car, we're rushing to the hospital to beat the police there, because we all see the images of what can happen when police and law enforcement respond to mental health crisis. They're not mental health professionals. They haven't been trained, right? So it was important. So going through all of that, I knew that furthered my mission to break the stigma inside the workplace, outside the workplace, and we need to go from stigma to support as it relates to the workplace, especially for those in marginalized communities. You see, because those things that I experienced that I just described outside the workplace, those are things that many people within marginalized communities experience in the workplace. Maybe that police isn't called when they disclose, but other things start to happen. That seems just as urgent, right? And we've got to think about how that shows up, right? Because we have these common misconceptions of what people with mental health conditions, what that means, right? I did a poll, like, what's the first word that comes to your mind? I did a Google search. These are the things: violent, dangerous, types of work that can be done, unreliable, inconsistent, moody, emotional, needs to be micromanaged, time and attendance issues. When I looked at my life, I had none of these issues. In fact, for me, work was the last to go. I didn't stop working until they locked me up in a mental health hospital, because the day that I decided I wanted to take my life, I 10 days later on a Saturday, on Monday, I was back on Zoom calls, right? And from that point, even for my clients, I want to go over and beyond. I heard this from so many other people. Because I have a mental health condition, I feel like I need to go over and beyond and compensate for that. But for some reason, these are the labels that we see. I think about my managers in the past, like, could there have been signs indicating? Because when you see signs and we think, oh, low productivity, high absenteeism, those are things that we say when we think about, okay, is someone struggling with their mental health? We don't think about the other side of that. You see, my manager didn't see as a red flag. Why am I getting, in the past, why am I getting emails from Natasha at 1 o'clock every single morning? Not once did they say, Natasha, are you sleeping? I'm worried about you. You're here late, and then you go home late, and then I'm getting emails from you all times of the night, every single night. No, I got praise for that. You exceed expectations on your performance review. That's what I got from that, right? So we've got to look at different behaviors, not those that demonstrate just depression or low productivity, but is someone being highly productive, right? And those are the things that we tend not to think about. So whether you're here sitting as a DEI professional, an entrepreneur, an HR professional, we need to prevent, protect, and promote the mental health of our employees, right? When we think about it, all right? And one of the first things we got to do is address what? Burnout. How many of you are burned out right now? You can go ahead and raise your hand if all this in here. And if they are, just give me 2 blinks. Because some of y'all were like, I see it in your face though. I can spot a burnout when I see it, right? So let's think about the way that burnout develops, right? These are the 4 stages of burnout. And I talk about this in my book that's out front that you're all going to come see and buy afterwards. But let's think about burnout for a minute. You get that new job or a new assignment, you know. You're so excited about it, right? You're on fire. You can't believe it. I got a new job. And that fire is fueled with fulfillment, passion, motivation, and promise, right? For a better future. And then as you go along, that fire starts to be fueled even more with those things that we didn't quite expect. How many of you are HR professionals here? Okay, quite a few, me too. You know how we put in those job descriptions other duties as assigned? It's very small, it's the last one, thing's insignificant. But that's like the main duty that you have. It's all the stuff that's not in the job description. So that second phase, that's all the other duties as assigned, right? I didn't know I was going to be doing that, you know. And somebody gets laid off, it's like, oh, who's going to be hired? Who's going to replace that person? You are. Congratulations. So that fire is growing, right? But now it's being fueled by things that we didn't expect. And then if you're in a marginalized community, it really starts to burn. Because on top of this, these other duties, you experience other things. Microaggressions, discrimination, right? No acknowledgement or appreciation for doing the other duties as assigned, right? You feel like you have a target on your back. So at this point, this fire is growing. It is in full development. What happens when you have a fire? We've seen the Canadian wildfires. We've seen the Hawaiian wildfires. What happens? It starts with one tree, and then what happens? It spreads. It spreads to others. When that fire is fully developed, then guess what? At that point, you start to hate work. And you can't wait to share it with anybody that will listen. Right? That fire starts spreading. You're in the break room, you're getting that coffee, and you're waiting for somebody to come in, and that person was having a good day. They were so excited about their day at work. They're driving to work. They went to the Renaissance tour last night. They're like, I think I'm falling in love. You know, they're just driving in, they walk in, and guess who's sitting there waiting for them to ruin their day? Did you hear they're having a pizza party today? Here we go again, pizza. You know, they're going to ruin it, right? right? Because they want to spread that fire. If I'm mad and I hate it here, you're going to hate it too. And I'm going to make sure that you do. I'm going to call out everything that's wrong with this place, right? And then finally, after I've spread my fire around, then guess what happens? That original tree, it's not on fire anymore. It's just watching everything else burn. Because it's burned out. It's completely done. Have you ever lit a match and let it just burn? What happens to that match after it's burned out? Ash. You can't do anything with it anymore. It's useless. You can't relight it. You can't ignite others. All you can do is like draw on the sidewalk, right? That's it. So it's so important that whatever your role is, or even if you're an individual contributor in your organization, that you take measures to intervene, right, in burnout before you get to these points. And that's very hard for many of us. It was very hard for me because it was go, 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 right? And so therefore, but we've got to do that. And one of the ways that we try to accomplish this is by work-life balance. Raise your hand if you're all about work-life balance right now. Put your hand down because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's no such thing as work-life balance. And I found that out early in my career. So I decided I'm not going to try to do work-life balance. I'm just going to do work. So my husband came out of the workforce. He was a teacher. We see my career trajectory, but we knew, like, you can't do it all, like, you know. So he takes care of the house, all that. I was all proud to say, I don't wash dishes, I don't wash clothes, my husband does that, right? But I didn't realize I'd taken the whole work thing too far until we moved to New York City. Now, if you've been to New York City, you know there's a school, like, on every single corner. There are so many schools, they don't have names. They go by numbers. My child was a PS24, okay, a number. There's no mascot, just 24, right? Totally different than down there. He has no idea what football is. It's a whole different child. Anyway, we won't go into that. But, so I assumed that she went to school on the corner. So it's around October, and my husband one day had a doctor's appointment. Was like, hey, can you take Shannon to school today? I'm like, sure, I can do that for you. I'll take her to school. So I get in the car, we drive up. I'm like, all right, have a great day. And she goes, Mom, this isn't my school. And I'm like, well, what school do you go to? I'm completely clueless. And so I called my hubby as a FaceTime. I'm like, why are you going to school all the way over here? What is this? And the thing about it was, I wasn't upset that I didn't know what school she went to. I was upset that he didn't tell me what school she went to. That's how bad it was, right? So when we're chasing work-life balance, it's not a thing. Because that implies that you're going to have an equal amount of work, you're going to have an equal amount of life, and when you're trying to go on that hamster wheel, it's going to lead you to nowhere, right? So what do we do instead, right? We try to achieve work-life harmony. Isn't harmony beautiful? I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I still by that. I did. You know where I'm going, right? And you know the choir is up there, all of a sudden soprano stars singing, and the tenors come in, and they bring it all together. And that's just like the best part, right? That's when you're on your feet, right? But we want to bring that into our lives. We want to harmonize instead of balance it. We want to harmonize our work and our life. We want to bring the beautiful parts of our personal lives and our professional lives together. Those things that we really enjoy on Saturday and Sundays, why can't we do those on Mondays and Tuesdays? Or the things that we do on Wednesdays and Thursdays, why can't we integrate that sometimes into Saturdays and Sundays? So this is how it shows it to me. I'm getting kind of like how am I going to play golf at work? Right? So this is how that shows. This is how this shows up for me and what I do. And maybe I'm a little bit more fortunate because I don't have like physical space that I'm always traveling. But that also, at the same time, right, that poses a challenge because since COVID, I actually got to know my kids. I know what school they go to, all that kind of stuff. And so, because they're at home, and I'm at home, that's a really unique situation. But people go, I go to right? Or things that I'm like, oh wow, I never thought about that. Or I've never heard that experience before. And what do I do when I come home? I don't keep that to myself. I share that with my kids. Like, hey, did you know A, B, C, and D? Or let me tell you about this experience that someone had, so that when you enter the workforce, you know about this experience, or if you encounter it, right? Or if I'm on the road, I have my son here who's supposed to be in this room taking my photos and my pictures. I literally had him drive from Auburn, Alabama to be here, and he disappeared. So that's another issue that we're going to assume the best intent here. But here, I'm on the road. He lives in Alabama. I live in New York. This is close to Alabama. Like, hey, meet me here. Come be a part of my work. See what I do, right? A few weeks ago, I was gone for several days. I flew my daughter to where I was. Like, hey, skip school. Come here. Come to Minneapolis. Right? She was doing the same thing. Come take pictures of mom. They get tired of taking pictures of mom. Come take pictures of mom. And, help me sell books. Like, let's learn this business, right? So that's how I harmonize. I go for a long walk. Some of you came by my table and saw the picture I have in there. Like, you look different. Because I've lost 80 pounds since December. And it wasn't always about video. You want to know why or how? There's no secret formula. There is no one figure or anything like that. And not that I'm bashing that, because take that if you need that. I tried it, it didn't work. Okay? But I decided to, first of all, put my mental health first, which is something I had never done before. We're going to talk about that later. But I started walking. I live right on the Hudson River in New York, so I walk down that river 100 blocks plus every day. But while I'm walking, guess what I'm doing? Thinking, ideating my next speech, my next client, my next this, right? So I'm harmonizing, right, that work. And you have to figure out what that looks like for you. I'm giving you examples of what it looks like in my world, but it's going to vary from person to person. We also have to talk about supporting the mental health of others. Because in many of your roles, how many of you, since COVID, are now the chief life psychiatrist at your organization? Right? All of a sudden, HR, DEI, like you know all about mental health, everybody, sends everybody to you, right? And so we've taken on this role of supporting the mental health of others. But when I think about others, it's not just those in our organization, even those in our personal lives. And as I've told you in my experience, that hasn't always been the best thing to do, right? Because if you haven't had someone that's experienced a mental health crisis, sometimes you just don't know how to respond, right? So I give people grace on that. So we're going to do an exercise for a second. Pull out your phone. You don't like people on their phone, but pull out your phone just real quick. Pull up your screensaver and show it to your neighbor. If you feel safe in doing so. we have the pictures of the people we love. So when we think about supporting the mental health of others, it's about empathy. And sometimes it's hard for us to take a walk in somebody else's shoes. And when we need to lean into empathy, I want you to visualize that person on that phone. Even if it's that fur baby, because my little kitty, Twinkles, she's supposed to be my emotional support animal, but she has like anxiety, so I end up being her. So I think about, right? I mean, whether it's Twinkles or the other two kids, which they're very jealous because I became a real mom when I had a little kitty, right? But I think about that person, right? And think about if that person on that phone, my classmate here showed me these beautiful kids, show how long it's been since we saw each other, like there's a whole troop of them I've never seen. And think about those kids. And if they were going to their manager and said, I'm struggling with my mental health, how would you expect that manager to respond to them? What support would you expect that manager to give to them? What would you want them to do? What would you want them not to do, right? Sometimes we just gotta lean into this, picture that face as somebody else's face that you really care about. And it's like, how would I support if this was my child, my husband, whatever that may be? And if that doesn't do it, shift your perspective if you have to for now, till we get used to having these conversations, to if that was a physical illness or a visible illness that we have more empathy for. You see, back in the day, and my HR professionals just say amen, because back in the day, we used to tell our managers, if someone comes to you and talks about their mental health, you better send them to HR ASAP, or send them to EAP immediately. You say, yep. Send them to EAP, do not have that conversation, because we didn't trust those managers who had those conversations, right? They're going to mess it up, right? But think about this, though. Because the APA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, it doesn't make a distinction of, oh, you respond this way for this disability, or you respond this way. No, it's all the same. So if someone came to you and said, I've been diagnosed with cancer, would you say, no, don't talk to me about that, go to EAP? No, you would want to know more, right? What phase of cancer are you in? What can I do to support you? Do you need to work from home? Let me send you some food, right? We would lean into that support. We would follow up. How's it going, right? We wouldn't just let them go to EAP and never follow up again. So why are we so inequitable when it comes to the difference between mental disabilities and physical disabilities, right? Yes, there's a legal risk to have those conversations, but we talk our managers through other legal risks of having any conversation at work leads to a legal risk, right? It's about having these conversations and getting them comfortable with having it. So I want you to think about who needs your support, right, today. When we just went through that. So this is no more stock photo. This is the real thing. My whole family, right? And think about who needs your support. One of those kids is supposed to be, I'm still trying to figure out where they are. But somebody's getting like Beyonce, somebody's getting fired. Who needs your support? And guess what? That person may as well be you. Because I want you to think about something. I want you to pull out that to-do list that you did this morning. I gotta go to this conference. I gotta leave here, go to the grocery store. I gotta take such and such to baseball. You know, got this whole list. But where on that list is you? Right? Because usually we're not on it at all. Right? And it's a miracle if we have just a moment for ourselves, right? So we've got to create a safe space for ourselves and for others, right? So what does that look like when we're creating that safe space? I'm going to get back to that you situation in a minute, bro. But before I do that, going back to these conversations that we avoid having, we want to make sure, right, that we're using person-centered language, right? I am not bipolar. I am Natasha, all right? But I am Natasha, who's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, right? So we want to do that, right? I have a disability, I'm not disabled, or a person with an addiction instead of an addict, or has been diagnosed. We want to avoid pathologizing people. Because sometimes people come to us, they share what they're doing, and guess what we do? Oh, I think you have ADHD. Because my daughter has ADHD, and they act the same way. Right? We don't want to pathologize people, right? Start labeling them, giving them medical conditions when we're having this conversation, right? Or categorizing that behavior, right? Oh, such and such is acting depressed today, right? We don't want to be, why is that dangerous to say such and such is acting depressed? The stigma, first of all, it insinuates that depression only looks one way, right? As we all know, depression looks very different ways. You will never see me, even on the day I decided to take my life, you would not have looked at me and said, oh, you look depressed, right? There's not been a moment in my life I have looked depressed, right? So even that is dangerous in itself when we start to categorize those with mental health conditions. And then we need to really, oh, no, look at that motherfucker, got 4 minutes, y'all. Okay. Tell them, like, encore now. We need to foster a culture of acceptance, right? We need to accept in our workplace, going back to this intersectionality of DEI and mental health. The people that are struggling most with their mental health are people in marginalized groups. Whether it's your Black employees, your Muslim employees, your Jewish employees, your LGBTQ, the list goes on and on. And guess what the #1 contributor of those mental health risks are? What'd you say? Anyism, sexism, but where? In the workplace. There was a study that was recently done that says a person's manager has more impact or greater influence on their mental health than their spouse, or their mental health professional. So how you are treated at work has a more impact on your mental health than at home, pretty much. No matter what you're going through. So we got to think about what people in marginalized groups are going through at work, especially in these uncertain times, right? As the fireside chat talked about, right? That we heard about this morning, right? And how we, whatever your role is in the organization, can remove those psychological risks. Because as they said earlier, it's not about the acronym of DEI. In fact, I like to say, if you follow me on LinkedIn, my #1 thing to say is DEI can stand for Dead End Initiatives. If they are not done well, if they are performative, if they have no commitment, if they have no budget, if they are not done right, unconscious bias training by itself will not do the trick. I had to say that 1,000 times in 2020. I'll take your money and do it. But don't tell me you're doing a DEI initiative. Just say I'm doing unconscious bias training. Let's just make that clear, because you're not going to put my name on this. You put my name on a training, not an initiative, right? Because that's not an initiative, right? So when we say we're committed, right, and then we're not, we roll back, all of a sudden we don't have a budget, we don't have a DEI officer, we don't have that, that's messing with my mental health. Because I think that there's no one there rooting for me and my success, right? So just to go on, they're going to put me out in just a second. I want you to think about this one thing, going back to supporting you, okay? You all look fantastic. Like you got up this morning, you didn't put on the most, stand up. Because I was telling her, you can't sit by me. You're not going to outdo me today. No, I love it. Everybody came in all colorful and beautiful, your hair's done, nails done, everything did, you probably got your nails, all of that. But let me ask you a question. You took care of your physical hygiene. I don't smell anybody. You took care of your physical hygiene. But what did you do for your mental hygiene before you got here today? What are you doing on a daily basis for your mental hygiene? What are you doing on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, an annual basis? Again, I used to wake up, automatically go on my computer, sit at that computer all day long, go traveling around the world. The next thing I knew, I weighed 250 pounds, my back was out of whack, I didn't know my kids, the list goes on and on. But now on a daily basis, I am intentional about taking care of myself. I put my walk to 59th Street on my calendar like it is a meeting with President Barack Obama. It's going down. I don't care who calls. I'm going on this walk, right? That's what I do on a daily basis. I wake up, I meditate. I journal. I tell myself I'm proud of you. I'm proud of my kids, right? I manifest things. That's what I do on a daily basis, right? On a weekly basis, I talk to that therapist. It's okay to say I'm in therapy. Right? I know that used to be a taboo, like, you didn't pray about it. You can do that too. But you need to get some help here too, to help you to know what to pray about. Right? What do you do on a monthly basis? My monthly is, you know what, for 2 days, a weekend, like this past weekend, it was pretty in New York for the first time, like in a long time. Went to New York State, 2 hours up, and just hiked and looked at waterfalls. A place where my phone didn't even work. Right? And just stay there all day. What are you doing on a yearly basis, right? Just like we go get those annual checkups, right? Are you having an annual checkup of your brain? Your brain is no different than the rest of your body. If you wake up and that shoulder's hurting every single morning for a week, then you just say, oh, no, let me go get an x-ray. Let me go do this, right? So we've got to pay attention to our mind like we do the rest of our bodies. And we've got to encourage that mental hygiene and give space to do so for the rest of our workforce. And it is even more crucial for those that are marginalized, oppressed, or a new word that I heard while I was out there on the road, just to share my lessons. People say we don't have minorities, we have people who've been minoritized, right, in the workplace. So I would take you through all that, they said I can't. So that means you gotta buy the book, it's all in there, all right? So, when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I thought that it would break my soul. I thought it was going to break everything that I was and who I was. But one day I woke up and I said, the only thing that's going to be breaking around here is the stigma of mental health, right? So I just leave you with this. Many people come up to me and say, thank you for being courageous and brave and sharing your story. And I appreciate those sentiments. I know it's a story that you don't hear often. But my hope is that one day, I'm not considered brave or courageous for just being me. And I hope you allow that same authenticity for you and those that work with you. All right, thank you so much.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Listen, Natasha mentioned her book, Crazy AF and Fearless, How to...
And the AF is and fearless. Oh.
And fearless. We got one in the house already. All right. She has a book signing table. Be sure to go and pick up her book, How to Go From Being Burnt Out, Unhappy, and what's that one?
Unmotivated.
Oh, unmotivated, to reclaiming your mental health at work. Let's give Natasha a big round of applause. Natasha, we want to take this opportunity to get some answers to some questions that we have. If you have a question at this time, we have about 10 minutes. If you have any questions at this time, please stand, state your name, and let's hear your question. Any questions? We want to start with our first question. I'll tell you what, I'll start it off. In the beginning, you mentioned that you gave $30,000 to a stranger on the internet. My email is Melinda at prismahealth.org.
Took away my cash out.
Okay, we'll help you get that reinstated. Let me ask you a question. Seriously, you talked about the stigmas and the different types of stigmas. We all have heard about mental health stigmas. How do we continue to address it and break it down? Because it's still an issue, it's still a problem. Talk to us about some of the things that we can do to break down and address stigma.
Yes, I mean, it's about sharing the stories, right? Because we only have this one narrative of it, right? And we've also been taught the danger of one story. So we've got to share our story. The more that we share, the more the stigma goes away. Because again, if we see more and more people who are functioning in society, who are successful, leaders in your organization that say, hey, I'm struggling with my mental health, I need a mental health day, that breaks the stigma, right? Because right now, we only have this one image. We're looking at your Kanye's, your Britney's, your this, your that, and every time they do something, they're labeled, oh, it's because of that. Which it may not be. It just maybe that's who they are, who knows, right? But we tend to label it that way. So why aren't we seeing when someone's being overly successful, like, oh, that's because, they have bipolar, and that comes with a lot of creativity, right? We don't think that way, right? So we've got to share our stories and be vulnerable. It starts with vulnerability, just like we do with other conditions, right? You see people on their cancer journeys, they document the whole thing, right? So therefore, you're like, oh, okay, I'm used to seeing someone getting chemotherapy. I'm used to someone doing this. That's what we have to do. Did you want to add on?
No, I have a question.
Oh.
Okay, please stand up, state your name, and ask your question, please.
Hello, I'm Natasha Johnson, and my question for you, Natasha, you talked a lot about your mental health practices, and I wondered if you could share how you created your mental health practices, your blogs, your meditation, and how people in the room can go about creating their own.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And it was a journey. This took a few years, and it will continue to evolve, right? Those practices may. But it started out with therapy. One of the first questions, because we realized that, it was because of the absence of my being at work that triggered my mental health crisis. So one of the things we thought about was, okay, if this were to happen again, another COVID, some reason you can't work, what else can you do that gives you that same fulfillment? I had no answer. I literally was like, I don't know, I've never done anything else, right? I don't enjoy it, I don't have a hobby, I don't have a this. So I had to think like embrace and start doing things like, oh, does this bring me joy? Does this bring me joy? And so I started walking while I was thinking about that, and I was like, wait, walking brings me joy. Like I feel very happy about doing that, and that's what I did. Then I started, my therapist again suggested meditation because my brain works very, very fast, and slowing down, and that allows me to slow down. It allows me to practice gratitude beyond professional success, right? So thinking about, oh, I opened my eyes this morning, my children are healthy, those types of things are the things that I meditate and manifest and those types of things as well. Recently, I started practicing Buddhism and chanting. And that's new. And that's also been very transformative. I had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. I wouldn't call myself an alcoholic, but I had an unhealthy relationship. Good day, alcohol. Bad day, alcohol. Right? When I started to chant, I looked at a drink and said, I don't want to do that anymore. Just all of a sudden. After many, many years. And haven't had one since. So it's finding that higher power, your purpose, beyond, and finding your own identity. And I think that was something that I'm still exploring. It's going to continue to evolve. But again, that's why it's so important to have that relationship with a therapist. Because when you find these things in advance, it's going to help you to intervene on a crisis. You don't want to wait till after a crisis to then discover these things, right? We want to be proactive, just like we don't get our blood pressure checked, our blood work done. To be proactive, our breast exams, our this exam, we want to be proactive with a mental health professional in that same way.
Thank you. Please stand and state your name and ask your question.
Oh, that's okay.
Just one.
Thank you for sharing your story on the whole mental health story. My sister, because I'm a counselor in training, and I want to know how you were able to find trust
took a while. It took a while. In fact, my husband and I were like, nope, we're done with this. We'll figure this out ourselves, you know. And I thought about that's very dangerous because, again, I had to shift my perspective. And if I had a bad experience with someone for a primary care physician or something like that, I wouldn't say I'm never going to a doctor again. I'm just going to keep searching until I find a doctor that I'm comfortable with. Like when I was pregnant with my kids, like, oh, I'll find someone I'm comfortable with, right? So I just had to keep searching. It took me 3 or 4 to get to someone. And I may change again because as I evolve, I may kind of, max out with them. They may, that's it. I can't offer you any other thing. So it's an evolution. It took a while. I'll admit, I'm still kind of like, make sure, but that does not mean I'm not going to seek treatment. And I think that's what we have to do. We're quick to say, oh, that happened bad. They're not going to go back there. But you got to shift your perspective. Would you say that for other parts of your body? Oh, I've got this sore knee, but I've never gone to an orthopedic before again because I had one bad experience.
So Natasha, let's piggyback on what you just said about finding trust in mental health counselor. A lot of us here, work and we access our mental health therapist or professional through EAP. And you and I had a conversation about this. Talk to us about accessing EAP and then what's beyond EAP.
Yes, and I talk about this in the book because as I thought about my journey even before my crisis, when I talk to so many people in the workforce and they're like, EAP is my only resource, right? And what I came to the conclusion is, and I love acronyms. Oh, here's my photographer that showed up an hour ago. Give him a round of applause. We'll have a performance review after this. EAP MBA promises because we often think that's the only solution. Go to EAP, all your problems will be solved. And it's not, right? First of all, it's not immediate access. You gotta wait a day or two, sometimes longer than that. You don't get to choose who it is. You get 3 or 4 sessions, and then you're out there on your own. So you just poured out your whole heart, and guess what? You gotta find somebody else to do it all over again with, right? So we've got to think about other ways to make sure that there's enough access to services. I'm not saying EAP is bad, but I promise you that can't be the only thing you have, right? You need an on-demand app where your employees can access immediately, right? You've got to check your health insurance benefits because have you ever asked your providers, if you're in HR in charge of benefits, how many mental health professionals are available to what's the ratio? Because guess what? Across the U.S., the number of mental health providers to employees is 1 to 30,000. So if you have a workforce of 30,000, it's very possible they only have 1 mental health professional to access. And then they have to pay out of their pocket at $300 an hour if they can find someone. And then that's where those numbers of, oh, this many days lost to suppression and this, and that's why this is a bad rap. It's not because of the disorders and the diseases and all of that. It's because you don't have access to treatment, right? So we've got to do our due diligence to make sure that our workforce has access to treatment and not think that, oh, you have medical insurance, you have EAP, that's enough, right? You've got to dig deeper at that and do an audit.
Excellent. I saw one question. We have time for one more question.
I'll give my table later.
Yes.
You're welcome to
Thank you. Please stand and state your name and ask your question.
Hi, Leah Robinson. Can you talk a little bit about your husband? I think I heard you say he was an educator.
Yes.
And so could you kind of expand on probably his grounding in education really helped you along the way, or just it's amazing that you gave away $30,000.
Yes.
And, you still have a husband. I mean,
It really is. Yeah. I almost didn't. I'll be real. It almost didn't. It wasn't until we had to do more research around. And then believe me, I don't know if his education came into place at all. He grew up in a very sanctified household where mental health was not, any topic of discussion. However, he was driven out of education due to racism of being the only black teacher in Northwest Arkansas. And so he had experienced depression and anxiety, but he never got treatment. There's stigma, especially for black men, of saying, I'm not okay, et cetera, et cetera. So he had to do a lot of research around bipolar disorder and realizing one of the common traits is excessive spending and giving. That's like one of the top things that excessive spending and giving. In fact, I was watching Selena Gomez's documentary. She has bipolar disorder. One thing she said, she thought all her friends should have a new car. If she bought all her friends a new car, it's just part of it. So he had to see that that was a symptom of disease and not just me being just overly intelligent there. But yes, I mean, not to say that that didn't cause problems, but yes, I'm very fortunate throughout what we now know is a bipolar manic episode. That's what that's called, that I was in at that moment, searching for my identity, just being a whole different person. That was a bipolar manic episode, and then I went to the bipolar depressive episode after I came down from that. Okay. But I'm not sure if his education prepared him for what he was going to do. I'm not sure if anything prepared him for me, even before this episode. But anyway.
Let's give Natasha.